I'm Luke Gittos, reporting from TUC's Putting People First for the Current Affairs Forum and World Bites. We've been out on the demonstration all day, asking people what they think the demonstration might achieve, what they think of the G20 more generally, and how they think the debate is shaping itself around the economic crisis. We've been getting some very mixed results. Some people feel generally quite frustrated with some systemic problems that they feel are arising out of capitalism more generally. Some people feel that the attacks on bankers individually are misplaced and that the bankers have been scapegoated essentially by our political leaders. But generally people feel a sense of frustration with something they feel essentially is out of their control. There's been around 5,000 people on the demonstration today. As you can see here, it's thinning out slightly towards the end of the day. Obviously you have a series of speakers and musicians, but we generally get a broad mix of people and a kind of carnival atmosphere is the best way to sum it up. I'm here with Patrick, who might be familiar to some of you World Bites viewers. He's from the Institute of Ideas. Patrick, why have you come along on the demonstration today?
Well, the demonstration today has had a lot of hype because of the G20 meeting, and there was a real sense that, there's some genuine frustration from people that, they're worried about their jobs, they're worried about the economic crisis, and, I was here today to try and talk to people and understand what's going on. I think there have been some kind of mixed views from people today. It's actually a lot smaller than we thought. And actually, even though some of the banners suggest, anger and people saying it's the end of the world or, it's very changing climate today, I have to say. But, people are talking about climate change and the fact that the world's going to end soon. There isn't really any sense of anger yet. There is a carnival, very kind of quite laid back feel. This seems more like a party in a sense.
And do you get any reason why that might be the case? Why is there a lack of any kind of real genuine anger or a kind of productive outlet of frustration?
What you tend to get are people saying, well, fine, it's capitalism that's causing a problem, but there's nothing we can do about it, but we're here to kind of show some kind of solidarity, show we're not happy. Or they do tend to say, well, actually what we need is more regulation, and we're calling to the G20 to step in and to do something about that. So there is a real mix of ideologies and views, but there isn't any sense of a common sense of values or purpose. It's a real kind of umbrella, this. It's jobs, justice and climate. But really that incorporates everyone, but it means that no one really seems to have a common sense of why they're here. And that, I think, is probably the problem, and that's why people have been wandering about a bit, caught up with some of the music, but aren't really, able to really focus their attention on one thing in particular.
My name is Mark. I'm here because I'm exercising my right to protest, basically. I think British people should be allowed to protest, and there should be sort of no media campaigns against us protesting and scaring us into not protesting.
And do you think this kind of more broad-ranging demonstration, which encompasses a broad range of issues, can be productive and have an influence on the process of the G20?
I think it's massively important. People like me, like white middle-class people who would never ever go out and protest, to have someone like me here, with a nice short haircut and washed and things like that, is vastly important, because it says, okay, there's a sort of like terribly acceptable person coming to these things, and they're really annoyed about what's going on, and they want something to change. I do think that sort of solutions should be provided as well.
And do you have any perspective on how you might think the economic crisis might be resolved?
I do have a perspective. I would really like to see it collapse, and then something come out of that collapse, as opposed to us sort of helping it out. I really do want to see it collapse. Hence why I would ask people not to buy houses. I would ask people not to capitalise on house prices going down. Just let the house market collapse, and I really do think something good will come out of it.
Would you think this will have an impact on the G20 or the way the world leaders are thinking about the economy?
Not necessarily, because it just shows how much there's to be done, but it doesn't really draw the leaders' attention to anything in particular, so it's easier for them to just brush over it all.
My name is Paul Cook. I'm Advocacy Director for Tier Fund. We're one of the main organisations behind the Put People First mobilisation. We've got 150 different organisations, thousands of people here. It's environment charities, development charities and faith agencies, and the church has been very much at the heart of this. We're calling those world leaders, those 20 most powerful people, to put people first when they come to have their considerations and discussions.
And how do you think practically they might go about doing that?
I think it's some real practical action they can take, both in terms of reforming global institutions like the World Bank and the IMF so they work better for the poorest, most vulnerable people in our world, but also critically on climate change. We need to see them taking real steps to release billions of dollars to help those poor communities to adapt to that climate change, as well as pointing the way to a good global deal in Copenhagen at the end of this year.
And what do you think the purpose of the demonstration was today?
The purpose of the demonstration just generally to raise awareness. I think to realise, what's been going on, that sort of unbridled wealth generation, and that money just doesn't continually appear out of, that the pie can't just continually keep getting bigger and bigger, and everybody's just going to end up getting their own little slice of it. That we actually need to start looking for feasible solutions nowadays to actually share the wealth. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Stephanie, and I think you should do what you can. Always do as little or as much as you can.
And what do you think the purpose of the demonstration is here today?
Well, it's to show people that most people actually care what's going on. Doing something this huge, especially in our capital city at the time of G20, it's just telling the leaders that people do care.
And what kind of practical benefit or impact do you think this will have on the G20?
I think it will make them take notice of how much people are prepared to do to get change.
And what kind of change are you talking about?
Fair trade, fair equal opportunities for everyone.
What do you mean by people and planet before profit?
Well, we live in a world where money is the most important thing. It makes the world go around and everything, whereas we should be putting people before all those other things, and then our future before that, because we don't have a planet, we're not even going to have people. So
I don't want to be too cynical, but I don't get a sense that it's a very big crowd. I don't get a sense that it's all the media talked it up to be, in terms of the amount of people, and the kind of vibe that I was expecting is not here. So, yeah.
And what do you think the protest has been put out there to achieve?
I would say, well, it's hard to say, isn't it? Generally, it seems to be promoted very hard by the media as a kind of very politically correct protest against capitalism, but, with a certain set of kind of rubric about jobs and the climate and this sort of thing. But I don't know, right to this point, I don't really get a sense of the purpose, or that there's any genuine anger or alternatives being put forward.
And do you think public action like this can genuinely have an impact on the thinking of world leaders?
No, not really. And it doesn't really challenge the system. Like, for instance, the climate agenda that Obama says he's going to buy into ultimately doesn't challenge elites, it doesn't challenge capitalism. It's actually promoted by many elites and capitalists in the first place. So I don't really think they care about this particularly, probably partly because it's so on message for what political leaders are already talking about and already is in their manifestos. So,
well, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jenny Fines for World Bites here in Dalston, East London, trying to find out what people really think about the G20 summit this week.
I don't really feel like it's been anything different from what's happened at other summits before.
They have to keep the capitalist show on the road, don't they, basically, but it's just whether the solutions that they're putting forward, which are nowhere near radical enough, are going to work. That's the problem for me.
Well, I think the world leaders need to do something more than what they're promising to do. Every time it's just like a promise on the table, but nothing's happening. So I think they need to do more actions than just saying by the words what they're saying about. And I think it's something they need to look back and see why the credit crunch is happening, what's the cause of it, to take an action before this thing can repeat again, because it affects the whole world, especially third world countries as well.
Luke Gittos here, reporting at the Financial Crises March at London Bridge. A very strange atmosphere here at the moment. There seems to be more media than protesters. It's very difficult actually to discern who is actually here on the march and who is here to report on the march. Coming through Bishopsgate this morning, there was a real atmosphere of fear. The Royal Bank of Scotland has been boarded up. There's a real sense that something is going to happen. But at the moment, looking at the state of play here at London Bridge, it seems like a bit of a damp squib. I'm hoping, by speaking to some people who are here on the march, that we might hopefully get a real sense of what is needed to be achieved, and hopefully get behind some of the hype around a riot, any kind of aggression, and hopefully there's some real political substance that we'll be able to get to grips to. But at the moment, it's difficult to see where that substance is going to come from.
My name's Josh, and I'm here because I'm part of a large group of conscious people who are quite pissed off at the state of things at the moment. Now, I have got doubts about whether it's just a big organised punch-up, but I would rather be here than anywhere else, I guess.
And what do you think the purpose or aim of the demonstration or organised punch-up is?
That's a very complicated question. there's definitely a place for people to come out and show what they feel by walking the streets. I mean, there's a huge precedent, of like people, when they get really pissed off, they just start walking.
One of the main criticisms levelled at the marches, both on Saturday and today, was that there was no coherent message and there was no purpose for really being on the streets, and there was no coherent message coming out of the protest. How would you respond to a criticism such as that?
As I understand it, I'm following the green horse today, which represents the climate chaos aspect of the demonstration. That I'm quite pleased, actually, that I know what I'm doing today, because it could be a lot less organised, frankly.
And what's the best possible outcome from the demonstration today?
That everyone goes and has a party in the city and we all come home safely.
I'm Max and I'm here just to have my say and to get my voice out there, basically.
I'm Sam, I'm 17 and I've realised at the age of 17, no matter how politically aware I am, I'm still unable to vote. I'd like to be able to have my voice as I can't vote, I'd like to be able to have my voice out there. The financial crisis which is currently going on, and at fault of the bankers and the politicians, I think there was at one point a politician who was paying his son, saying he was doing political work for him, and it turns out that he wasn't, he was just giving his son our tax money. I mean, it's ridiculous.
And so you see the G20 is quite closely tied into the issues of politicians' expenses.
Oh, well, yeah, obviously. It's the top 22 now world leaders of the world. I mean, if there's any time to go and have your say about what's going on in your own country or globally, it's now. I mean, that's when they're all here. We haven't had an opportunity like this in our country since 1933. I mean, it's something to be able to... it's part of history as well, to be able to go there and say, I stood there and had my voice, I did it there. It's just something beautiful as well.
Sorry to push you on this, but now that you've got your voice, presumably you're on the street, what do you want to say?
Oh, what I want to say is, I don't know what's right, but what I do know is what's going on at the moment isn't right. What's the way the banks work and the way that our government works, just, I mean, we're meant to be in a democracy, but when a rich man can go in and vote and get his voice out, what about a homeless person? I mean, that's not democracy, surely, if a homeless person can't go out and get their voice out. That's what I'm here to say, it's people first, people's voice.
One of the main criticisms levelled at today's demonstration and the demonstration on Saturday is that what set it apart from previous historical demonstrations is that it lacks this single message, it lacks this coherent aim. I mean, how would you respond to a criticism like that?
Well, it does lack the single message. There's not just one message going out at the moment. There's lots of different people who've all got each different views, but at the end of the day, they're all going towards one thing, which is fairer for the people, make it easier for the people.
I mean, coming through Bishopsgate this morning, it was noticeable that there were significantly more police than protesters, and it seems that this demonstration has been really hyped up as something really significant in terms that it will bring out a large amount of aggression, and the police have responded in kind. So do you think that this represents a legitimate response?
I think it's a fear tactic to stop people going. I mean, there is a lot of it is. There is a lot of police out at the moment, but the worst problem about today's protest is, I think today at the same time there's a match over in Wembley for qualifying, isn't there? Yeah. I mean, surely I'll be more scared of them, of football hooligans, than of protesters. That's all, Put the police on them, not us.
So if you could tell us who you are and what you're doing here today.
Certainly, darling. I'm here to uphold the rights of all bankers and all bank bosses to make as much money as they possibly can.
So you're speaking on behalf of bankers. So, I mean, what do you think the banking sector can do in order to pull Britain out of financial crisis? And do you think they have a legitimate role to play in that?
Well, I think their role is to make as much money as possible. Privatise profits, nationalise losses.
If you could see one message coming out of the protest today, what do you think it is?
Greed is good.
Thank you very much, Dolores.
Welcome, darling.
I'm demonstrating here to say that the profits and the decision-making process of the financial system should include us, as the socialisation of the risk includes us.
Hi, I'm David, and I'm here just because the whole system by which our society runs has proved itself now to be completely unsustainable. And I'm here just because I want to be part of and show my support for a change to a more holistic society whereby our ecology does not suffer because of our economy.
So if you could see one purpose emerging out of the G20 debates, protests here today, what do you think the message is? What do you think people want to achieve?
Well, firstly, it's really important that we put it on people's TV screens and people know that the G20 are meeting here today in London and they are taking decisions that affect all of us that we don't have a part in making. So just getting out there and sort of making it public knowledge and making what they're discussing public knowledge.
And yeah, I think it's important just to show that there are a large number of people who are self-educated, who are willing to put their time and their energy into creating a different society and creating a more sustainable one, and that it's important that people recognise that, and yeah, that we're capable of doing it.
In terms of practically bringing people into these financial the financial decision-making process that you discussed, what kind of practical steps do you see that might be taken by perhaps people on the G20 march here today, but perhaps more broadly politicians and world leaders, to bring people into that financial decision-making process?
Well, for instance, when a bank has a board meeting to discuss policy, why, in that board meeting, can you not have representatives from local ecological groups, local school groups, representatives of the community? The decisions of the bank affects that community and the global community. Why can't you have a representative of Greenpeace sitting on the board of a NatWest decision-making process when the global impacts of the financial system affects the ecology in general?
One of the criticisms that have been levelled at the demonstrations, both on Saturday and today, is that it lacks any coherent message, and that's what distinguishes it from maybe some anti-capitalist protests in the past. How would you respond to a criticism like that?
I think it's a good point. I think there's the face of the anti-capitalist movement today is it's very complicated, and there are lots of different aspects of it. And a lot of it's, as like with demonstrations like that, a lot of it's to do with performance and show. Do you know what I mean? I'm standing here wearing my clown trousers, having a sensible interview about the state of the financial system, and I understand certain confusion there. I suppose what I'd say is that demonstrations like this are different from actually the ins and outs of policy, and it's important in demonstrations to have sort of aspects of carnival, aspects of show, aspects that are more three-dimensional than just simple sort of, policy. It's got to be a bit fun, it's got to be a bit interesting to sort of get people on board.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's lots to be said that I suppose activism is often seen as something that's like very overly serious and something like that, but it is a lot of fun actually. And it is fun to push the system and see what it will and what it won't tolerate. And it's important to do that actually. I think every citizen has a duty actually to be naughty, I guess.
Great cash. Money. Stretchable money. It stretches all the way to the end of the month.
We're here in the offices of London firm cScape to talk to CEO Rob Killick, who is a regular blogger on the economy and a sponsor of an alternative summit called the Battle for the Economy, which is happening on the 16th of May. Rob, can I start by asking you what you made of the G20 summit? I mean, there's a lot of talk about it being a real moment of victory for Gordon Brown. I mean, even Nicolas Sarkozy stuck around till the end, which some see as a really good thing. What did you make of it?
Well, the first line of the Times editorial this morning was "low expectations have been met," which I think summed up my reaction to it quite well, and I think probably most people's. And the most striking thing for me is that they evaded some of the biggest issues which are behind the current recession, such as the toxic debt issue with the banks, the changing balance of the world, with the emergence of the developing countries and so on. They pulled it off, but they haven't fixed anything.
I mean, on your blog you talk about 3 interlocking crises. Can you flesh that out a bit?
The first one, which is the one which we've all seen unfold in the last year or so, is the fact that the political elites in the world are historically less coherent and less sure of themselves than has been the case for a long, long time. I mean, this is not a new thing. We know that politics has moved more and more to the margins of society over the last 10, 15 years. We've seen with the emergence of the recession how dangerous that is, because the response of the different political classes in the world has been so hesitant and incoherent that they have actually made the recession worse than it might have been. The second part is that we are experiencing a change in the balance of the world with the emergence of China and India and other very dynamic, productive economies. And the relative decline of America, which was the unchallenged global power, and now feels the need to get 19 other world leaders in a room before it can make any decisive intervention in what's happening. And the third is the fact that there is no discernible alternative to the policies that have been pursued in the management of capitalism. Nobody's coming along and saying, instead of managing it like this, we should have a different way of organising the world economy, we should have different types of ideas. Opposition to capitalism is at a historically low ebb.
Do you think there's anything practical that can be done?
Well, there are many practical things that could be done, I think, but they are not necessarily simple policy options. There are cultural and social questions that have to be confronted. One is, which particularly affects us in this country, is that we have a very risk-averse society. It's very hard to imagine that you could have a renewal of economic dynamism with that kind of context. We have a very profound problem. It appears to be one of economics in that our economy is sluggish and less productive than others. But that economic problem has to be understood within the social context, and that's what makes it very challenging, but at the same time actually quite exciting, because I think it opens up the possibility of a new kind of politics.
You're sponsoring the Battle for the Economy, which is happening on the 16th of May and has been labelled an alternative summit. What makes it so alternative?
Well, we will be talking about the things that the G20's tried to evade. One thing we'll be talking about is what do we need, what kind of debates, what kind of discussion do we need to have, what kind of policies ultimately do we need to pursue to turn our country from being a rather backward, conservative, risk-averse country into one where we can all get excited about the future.
We were out filming on the TUC march and on the London City G20 demos. One thing that struck us was that they seemed to be quite incoherent and scattered. I mean, does that surprise you? And what was your perspective on the demonstrations?
I think that the demonstrations reflect politics today, that there is no coherent alternative to capitalism. There are many critics of capitalism. There are lots of things about capitalism that people don't like, and often rightly so. But the incoherence of the demonstration and the small size of it also reflect a more general passivity in response to the recession, which is very striking. I mean, they've been isolated, and not just in the UK, they've been isolated outbursts of anger and rage, and they've even kidnapping bosses in France apparently now. But none of this contains the solution. The protests are not really about an alternative way of doing something, except insofar as they have in common a general anti-growth element to them. That's the one thing that they tend to have in common.
Can you explain a bit more about what you mean by anti-growth?
Well, there is a sentiment which I think is increasingly prevalent, that the cause of many problems in the world today is economic growth, and free trade as well as a kind of corollary of it, which I totally disagree with. For me, economic growth is the basis of human freedom. It is, unless you have enough to eat and the necessities of life, your life is very narrow and constrained. And I'm a firm believer in that, and I think that the opposition to capitalism has gone down the wrong path, because they've made the mistake of identifying capitalism with economic growth, and not surprisingly, because capitalism is the only mechanism we have at the moment for economic growth. But it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Capitalism creates enormous inequity in the world. It can be extremely exploitative, but nevertheless it is the only mechanism that we currently have for providing people with the necessities of life and the hope of a better future. So I think that while I understand why people are reacting against what's happening in the world economy, I think that they're fundamentally wrong.
A lot of individuals on the march were concerned about climate change and about greedy bankers. Do you think that this anti-growth sentiment ties into those attacks?
Well, the bankers thing is a bit more straightforward. They've been scapegoated by politicians effectively. It's not just cowardly, it's avoiding their own responsibility for what happened. Particularly if you look at people like Gordon Brown, who spent the last 10 years extolling the virtues of the city and of the finance sector and encouraging the development of the finance sector as the basic driver of the British economy, which is what happened during that period, to turn around now and try and point the finger at the financial sector it's hypocritical, it's wrong. And it's actually dangerous because there's now evidence that investors are running scared. People with money don't want to be seen to be making money. And so, they're holding back from investing and helping the bailouts of the banks and so on. So it's a counterproductive thing as well. The whole question of climate change is very complex. I'm not a scientist. There's a way of looking at the climate change problem as being a problem of too much human activity. I would see it as not enough human activity, that we haven't yet worked out how to produce energy without polluting the environment and so on. And I'd much rather we were focusing our efforts in that area than in cutting consumption, and particularly as the burden always seems to fall on the developing world rather than the Western world.
It was noticeable at the demo on Saturday that a large part of the presence were from international NGOs. I mean, what do you think their part is to play?
I'm sure many NGOs and charities do good work, but a lot of them have become heavily politicised, particularly with the sustainability and anti-growth message. I find it quite astonishing at the moment that people could be arguing against world trade when world trade is collapsing. When people stop using mobile phones in the West, China stops producing them, and the raw materials which are needed to create them are stop coming out of the ground in African countries. And that's what's happened, is that the economies of many African countries have been completely hammered. I mean, it's bad enough for us. We face unemployment, insecurity, and so on because of the recession. In many African countries, it's about not being able to eat. And for people to be campaigning against world trade at this particular time and yet still claiming to be acting in the interests of those people is just absurd.
I mean, the police were out in force at the G20 demos. Do you think this is a sign of the times, or do you think this is just an overreaction from the police and the state?
Well, the media were desperate for something to happen, and the most striking image of the whole 3-4 days, however long it was for me, was of 3 guys breaking the windows of the Royal Bank of Scotland with about 50 photographers taking pictures of them while they were doing it. If you talk about a kind of media fabricated event, that was it. I was actually thinking, well, all those guys there with the cameras, somebody should have said to those guys, it's wrong to smash windows. Rather than, but obviously the whole thing was just a stunt. The police don't ever really need an opportunity to get stuck in, and particularly when the people that they're policing have been demonised so effectively in the days running up to the event. So the police tactics didn't surprise me at all. I've seen it many times before.
And I mean, how do you think this demonstration compared to maybe previous demonstrations against similar institutions like the ones we've seen in Seattle and worldwide like that? Do you think there's a comparison to be made there, or do you think there's something quite distinct about this one?
The striking thing about the anti-globalist campaigns over the last 10-15 years is that as the ideas have become more mainstream, the protests and the demonstrators have got smaller and smaller. And it's a sideshow, basically. People should protest, I always think, if they feel strongly about something. I've no problem with that at all. But it's the absence of any real concerted anger, frustration in an organised form, which is most striking about the recession, actually irrespective of what you are campaigning for or against. It doesn't really seem to matter that people are, I think, extremely confused, angry, slightly traumatised because of the shock of it all. I'm just talking in this country, I just get the sense there's a global thing going on. But the one thing that most people have in common is that they really haven't a clue as to how we can get out of this.
I mean, on the protests, we spoke to a number of young people who were just really concerned that they didn't feel like they had a voice. They just wanted to protect their own right to protest. I mean, isn't that something positive we can take from the demonstrations?
Having a voice in itself, or voicing your frustrations in itself, is only really the beginning of a process. I mean, it's asking the right questions is much more important, and at the moment there aren't enough people asking even the right questions. I think the most striking thing for me, listening to lots of the protesters through the media, is that they seem to be more concerned about being there and being seen to be there than why they were there or what they were going to say to whoever they were complaining about. And it's the emptiness of the event. I heard somebody say, this is a symbolic demonstration. Well, it was either a demonstration or it isn't. I mean, what is a symbolic demonstration? And I think there was a highly symbolised element to the whole event, actually, but from the point of view of the protesters, the media, and even the police. You know, that it was a kind of fabricated event in which nobody really believed very much about anything in terms of the importance of it. I don't think people pretended that it was important, but actually, I think most of them on all sides knew that it wasn't actually that important.
I mean, you mentioned the media there. I mean, do you think there was a point where this actually became quite a theatrical protest in a sense?
Yes, it was. It was a highly stylised event. I mean, I've been on several of these events. It was something that the German young people used to do for many years at Anarchists in Berlin and on the May Day. And it was, even in this 10, 15 years ago, you'd struggle to know what the event was really about, other than them all just being out on the streets and having fun, knocking policemen's helmets off. Which, you know, if you're young, I suppose is fair enough.
Rob, thank you very much.
Simon!